Bernadette Peters and Lea Salonga returned to the Broadway stage with a concert-style revue that serves as a heartwarming tribute to Stephen Sondheim, but ultimately fails to be much more than just a concert. Hi, my name is Ben Daniels, and I love talking theater, movies, especially of the camp variety, music, and all things queer media. And today I'll be discussing Old Friends, a show that was kind of sitting in the back of my head since they did that one-night concert back in May of 2022 in London, before eventually transferring to the West End stage as a revue production. I missed it in London, unfortunately, so I was ecstatic to hear that they were bringing it to Broadway and keeping two of their big headliners, Bernadette Peters and Lea Salonga, and some of the London cast as well. And this, as sad as I am to say, as much as I did enjoy myself, is still a shockingly underwhelming production. I can barely call it a production in the traditional sense. I can barely even call it a revue. This is really just a concert that they perform 8 shows a week, featuring some of Sondheim's most iconic work while disregarding some of his really cool, obscure stuff. There's not much more to it than that. I loved finally having the opportunity to see Bernadette Peters on stage, and seeing Lea Salonga was great as well. Joanna Riding was my second time seeing her, but, you know, the cast was great. But it's just a concert. I wish there was some sort of, even just like a tiny shred of an overarching narrative. Maybe a story related to Sondheim in some way. This felt lazy. I don't know how else to put it. It felt half-assed, and in its song selection, very predictable. So, a brief overview. Stephen Sondheim's Old Friends, as mentioned, does not have a story. It's classified as a revue where stars band together and sing some of Sondheim's greatest hits. And that's about it. Smaller than a log line. This is really shaping up to be a shorter revue, all things considered. But interestingly enough, I find I still have a lot to say about this production. But before I get into that, let me give you a briefing on what you should expect when you go to the Samuel J Friedman Theatre when you go to see Stephen Sondheim's Old Friends. So, as I mentioned, Old Friends is performing at the Samuel J Friedman Theatre. It's a very charming theater. At only 650 seats, it's a very small theater and barely exceeds the minimum threshold for what can be classified as a Broadway theater, which is at least 500 seats. So it's very small and intimate, and not in a bad way. The seats were comfortable. I had no issues with legroom. Thankfully, it is not a cramped space. I was sitting in the mezzanine, row C, seat 115, so pretty far back, but since the theater is so small, there's really no seat that is too far. It was a fantastic view. However, and this is important, for reasons I will discuss in this review, for a production like this, you will want to sit as closely as you can. First few rows even, if possible. Believe me, you will not miss a thing, and you will end up having a much better experience. There's a lot of comfortable seating outside of the auditorium as well, so if you want to head out for a bit during intermission, it's a nice area to kind of just stretch and decompress. If you happen to be a member of the Manhattan Theater Club's patron program, they also have a cute little lounge located upstairs. Very charming theater overall. A great space to watch this concert-style production. So let's talk about the script and the score, although it would be more like a lack of script and all the score. There are no specific scenes written out for this. There are moments where Bernadette and Lea talk to the audience. It's not interactive or anything. They're just talking to us. And one build up to a song. But otherwise, there's not much to work with here. Isn't this such an informative review so far? The show is called Old Friends, a title which evokes a sense of nostalgia. It implies that this consists of a cast who are all old friends, in that they have all been in a Sondheim production or involved with him in some way, who all come together to put on a show in honor of their ultimate old friend, Stephen Sondheim. There's a lot they can do here. They could have shared anecdotes about their experiences with Stephen Sondheim. Isn't that what many performers do in concerts anyways? Like, give us something that ties into the theme that this title evokes. This could have been a lot more poignant than it was. In fact, disappointingly enough, there is very little reference to Stephen Sondheim himself until close to the end of the show. I wish there was at least some build-up to the songs written in. But yeah, not much dialogue here, not much build up to the songs except for one number, which I will talk about soon. There is, however, a lot of score, and arguably too much score. I love me some Sondheim, of course, but I don't agree with many of the song choices in this production. There was too much of his popular work and not enough of his obscure stuff. Sondheim's musicals need no introduction, of course, but when it's a 2.5-hour-long concert-style production, sometimes it's a little too much Sondheim. By which I mean, take a look at a show like Company, for example. Fantastic show. Arguably one of his best. They decided to perform 7 songs from that show and reprise one of them. That is ridiculous. That is overkill. Into the Woods, they performed 6 songs. Sweeney Todd, 5 songs. And that's already most of the show right there. What they should have done is picked 2 songs, maybe 3 songs maximum for any given show, and allowed more space for some of his more obscure work. A little more Assassins, a little more Passion, The Frogs, Pacific Overtures, Anyone Can Whistle. I was extremely disappointed that a show that is supposed to honor Stephen Sondheim's legacy didn't dare touch anything that was too obscure. There's a little bit of that in there, but it's so overshadowed by his bigger works, it feels imbalanced. We get some Sunday in the Park with George, we get some Follies, we get some A Little Night Music, which is great. None of those are obscure, but it's nice to see them represented, even if the song choices were predictable. We also get a decent amount of Merrily We Roll Along. The entr'acte is literally just the overture from that show, but it's a great overture, one of my favorite Sondheim overtures, so I'm not really complaining there. And it's fitting because the overture ends with Old Friends, which is the name of the show. All that said, I'm not going to pretend that I didn't enjoy myself watching this. The numbers that are done are performed stunningly, and there are some really good choices sprinkled in there. I love The Boy from ... I'm Still Here, which is a Sondheim song I've always loved. I love Follies so much. Being Alive brought me to tears, but context, which I will talk about in the spoiler section aside, that song always makes me weep. I loved Losing My Mind. Children Will Listen, though I do have one gripe with that number. Send in the Clowns. The songs were great. Like, it's still Sondheim songs. But again, it was too much of his popular stuff. A lot of people are suggesting that this show was supposed to focus on shows that were orchestrated by Jonathan Tunick, but that simply is not true. Plus, if that were the case, then where's The Frogs? Where's Pacific Overtures? As much as I loved watching this show and hearing some classic Sondheim, I can't help but feel that this show was in a lot of ways a missed opportunity. Now it's time to talk about the staging and direction. And again, there's not much to chew on here. There are no elaborate sets. The only thing coming close to that really are these brick-like looking stairwells that are very much giving West Side Story, which the performers would climb up and down on and sometimes sing on top of. So there's a little interaction with that set. It pulls in and out of the stage depending on the song, and it comes in 2 halves, one that comes in from the left side of the stage and one that of course comes in from the right. Not the most visually pleasing set for a show that seems to want to be a bit more glamorous, but it does what it needs to do, I guess. There are some staging elements to this, nothing too crazy. It is what it is. It didn't add much, but it definitely did not make the production worse. Interesting note with this production, when it comes to who sings the songs and the costuming and such, it very much harkens back to the original productions that these songs came from. And by original production, I mean the original production. We're not talking about the revivals here. You will not see a male cast singing You Could Drive a Person Crazy from Company, nor will you see a gay Jamie singing Not Getting Married Today. And the makeup from the Sweeney Todd songs really make Lea Salonga and Jeremy Sicom look like Angela and Len, which was really cool to see. So yeah, interesting detail to note about those numbers. Do not expect any representation from any visual elements of the revivals. Most of the time, it's just the singers singing the songs. Usually there are dance sequences to it or some other sort of staging choices. Oftentimes, you may see costuming pertaining to the song. The songs from Into the Woods and Sweeney Todd were especially costume heavy. Nothing too extravagant, but surely enough to give the number a little more depth rather than just singing it to an audience. So that was appreciated. Highlights that utilize these production traits, for example, Little Priest, very costume and makeup heavy to replicate the original Broadway production. Hello Little Girl, in which Bernadette was in a red cape, and Jacob Dickey was dressed like the wolf. Very cool stuff. You Gotta Get a Gimmick had costuming as well. They even had the costuming of Elektra, complete with the lights around her areas of focus. There's a screen behind the orchestra that can show different colors and visuals, and is utilized especially in the entr'acte, and another screen comes down onto the stage at specific moments as well. Nothing too major here. Honestly, what I thought was the most dazzling thing about this production, the staircase leading up to the orchestra. The staff with the music notes on it as railings was gorgeous, and I like how it has Stephen Sondheim's signature on the staff upstairs by the orchestra. Very beautiful way to frame this stunning orchestra, which sounded fantastic. But all around, there's not much in production value here, like sets and stuff, but the elements that are in here do help elevate this production from being more than just a basic concert. Moving on to performances, and we got some icons on that stage. Of course, the one and only legend Bernadette Peters herself headlines this production alongside Lea Salonga. Both of them do a fantastic job and give great performances, singing some iconic numbers. We also have Joanna Riding, Bonnie Langford, Jacob Dickey, Gavin Lee, some exceptional talent here. But let's not beat around the bush and just admit to ourselves the real reason why we are at the Samuel J Friedman Theatre this Broadway season. No matter what kind of production this is, the fact of the matter is we are seeing Bernadette Peters and Lea Salonga in the flesh singing Sondheim songs. That's why we're here. That's why we're seeing this. And they do not disappoint. My main gripe is the fact that Bernadette Peters actually does not sing Children Will Listen, which is weird because she sang it in London. Instead, it's sung by Lea Salonga, who gives a beautiful rendition, but the original witch was right there. Like, really? Furthermore, Everything's Coming Up Roses is also sung by Lea Salonga, even though A Mama Rose is right there. So that was a bit of a letdown, but Lea still does a great job with that song too. I don't know for sure why Bernadette didn't sing these songs, but out of respect for her, I will not go any further into making any sort of assumptions. Either way, Lea took over quite well, but I couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. So there's not much in the way of spoilers here. I guess the major thing would be how this show handles the topic of Stephen Sondheim himself, his legacy, and the fact that he has passed away. And honestly, I was pretty let down. The cast gives a very moving rendition of Not a Day Goes By from Merrily We Roll Along, backed up by that aforementioned screen that comes down on the stage, with images of Stephen Sondheim throughout his career projected onto it. And then they follow it up with Being Alive from Company. This occurs close to the end of the show, and it's really all we get. It was beautiful for what it was, but I couldn't help but be a little let down. Again, something like anecdotes that the actors are giving about Stephen Sondheim, or some other narrative thread pertaining to Stephen Sondheim would have been really appreciated. We get one lead into a song, Broadway Baby, in which Bernadette is playing an actress who is auditioning for a show and wants to use that song for her audition. She tells the piano man that she's going to sing a song by Stephen Sondheim, to which he responds, "Ugh, him again." It then transitions into that number. It was pretty brief, funny for what it was, but again, I would have appreciated if more of the songs had that sort of build up. Even if it was brief, it didn't have to be anything major. Just something to tie all this together and add a little bit of extra humor and lightheartedness to the show, and maybe some emotion as well. Some of the highlights here for me would have to be Loving You, sung beautifully by Lea. Agony was so funny. Everybody Ought to Have a Maid was great. The Man from ... loved it. I know that's in every Sondheim review, but I'm glad it's here too. The very, very condensed Into the Woods intro song was great. Children Will Listen brought tears to my eyes, as it always does, as did Send in the Clowns, Losing My Mind, Being Alive, of course, and Not a Day Goes By. I cried quite a lot, actually, but not exactly for the reasons I wish I did. I love how they start the show with the opening of Sunday in the Park with George, but, and I'm going to sound really nitpicky here, but really it comes from my love of Stephen Sondheim. I really wish they kept in some of the instrumental after those opening lyrics to the song. Those notes are pure magic and would have been a much cooler transition into Side by Side, which is the first big song of the show. Tonight was a fun number, and I really enjoyed I'm Still Here. I know I mentioned some of these songs already, but they're getting mentioned again. Of course, you can't go wrong with Everything's Coming Up Roses, but I had just seen Mama Audra and Gypsy the night before, so it didn't exactly wow me. Maybe I would have been wowed more if Bernadette Peters performed it. I won't deny that there is a lot of good stuff here, but I think the set list could have been tweaked a lot. Like I said, I would have liked to see them cut back a bit more from the amount of songs allocated to the more popular musicals in favor of giving us a nice balance so we have some representation of everything Sondheim. And no, simply listing the names of Sondheim musicals during the entr'acte is not enough. So, final thoughts. Despite everything I've mentioned, this still makes for a lovely evening out. I would not go so far as to not recommend this show. The songs are still beautiful to listen to, especially when they're sung by such icons. It's not a complete and utter disappointment. As a concert, this is great. I'm just saying, don't expect much else. Don't expect any elaborate review-style setups or beats, or even any semblance of a script. All that said, I won't deny my disappointment that this wasn't more than it was. This is supposed to be something of a send-off to their old friend Stephen Sondheim, and it just doesn't really feel like that. It doesn't even feel like a celebration of his life. There's no sort of theming here to make it that. And yeah, that really sucks. So with all that said, I'm going to give Stephen Sondheim's Old Friends a 3 out of 5. It's playing until June 29th, so if you'd like to do something over Pride weekend without needing to attend the crowded and straight-riddled parade, check out some gay icons performing a gay man's iconic theatrical work. It's still an honor to see them in the flesh, and I feel so blessed to have had that opportunity. Just don't expect too much out of this, that's all I'm saying. And I cannot stress this enough. Sit as close as you possibly can. You definitely want to be close to the actors here. They are the main draw. The dreaded partial view is not a thing at this show. If you like this review, you can give it a like. If you like me, you can subscribe. Stay tuned for some pretty fun stuff happening on this channel soon, and I'll see you there. Bye.